So the first question in the handout that was provided to you last week was how many immigrant businesses are in each neighborhood? So this is a spatial join. And why do you think it is a spatial join and not a tabular join? Well, if you remember, when we conduct tabular joins, that's what we call a one-to-one join, meaning there is one row in the table to each one feature in a shapefile. In this case, we're doing a one-to-many join, meaning one neighborhood could have many points within it. So that is a one-to-many join. Or one neighborhood could have 0 points within it. So let's get started with conducting this spatial join. Open up ArcMap and navigate to the folder that contains the source data geodatabase that we worked with last week. If you don't have that connection, you click here to connect to that folder, and then you find the folder that it is within and just connect to that particular folder. So we're going to add, let's first begin by adding the neighborhoods, Pittsburgh neighborhoods, into your map. The other layer that we'll be working with is the immigrant businesses. So let's add that to the map as well. Whenever you have two layers that you add to the map that have different projection or geocoordinate systems, it's always going to give you a warning. The ArcGIS program has what is called project on the fly. So different shapefiles with different projections will work with each other and it's called project on the fly. So they'll find a way to kind of project correctly with each other. So I always just ignore this. You almost never need to conduct a transformation. We can talk about transformations at a later time. Now, if you remember, you always want to make sure that we're using the right projection. We use the state plane system for projecting feature classes, especially when they're polygons. So the first layer that you add to your map is going to set the projection for your map. Now we know that Pittsburgh is in state plane south, but if you ever have a doubt or a question as to what state plane you should be in, there is a way to check that. If you go up to your Add Data button and select Add Data from ArcGIS Online, you have the option to look at spatial data that is available to you, and it's sometimes provided by a very reliable source. Sometimes it's not provided by a very reliable source, so it's always good to know what source it's coming from. If you just type state plane, enter, the very first option that comes up is the USA state plane zones. This tells you if, for instance, if you live in a very large state that has multiple state plane zones, and that is datum for projecting data, then you would want to make sure you're in the right state plane. So click Add this layer. Now you can't really see it because we're zoomed into a tiny little section of the state. Pennsylvania is a very large state and Pittsburgh is relatively small compared to Pennsylvania. But if you right click this new layer that you just added and select Zoom to Layer, you will see this is all of the different projection state planes within each state. So in my home state of Florida, I have 3 different types of projections. So if I'm making a map that's focused on Miami, then I know I need to use the Florida East projection. And the Identify tool allows you to click on a feature to get some information about it. So this is the state NAD 1983 State Plains Zone FLE. So that's the projection that I would want to make sure that my map is at. So I'm going to right click neighborhood, the neighborhoods, Pittsburgh neighborhoods, select zoom to that layer, and click outside of it so that I can see I should be in Pennsylvania, State Plain South, 3702. Great. So that's just a way to make sure that you're using the right projections. Now, if you're making a map of the entire United States, that's a different story. We use a different projection for a map at that scale. So let's check our data frame properties. Do you remember how to check to see what projection you're in? So to check your data frame properties to see what projection you're in, you simply just right-click this thing here that looks like layers, and it says layers next to it. That's actually your data frame, right? So layers is equal to your data frame. So you right-click layers, go to properties. So now you're in the data frame properties, and here you can look at some general information about units that you're using. If you want to change the units, you can do that here. If you want to assign a clipping, so we can talk about that later, but say I have like a small little area here that is my area of interest and I don't want to see anything around that area, then I can just select it as a clipped shape and it'll hide everything in all the data that is beyond that the boundaries of that area of interest. Coordinate system is what we're going to get into. That's what we want to use to check what projection we're in. And currently our data frames coordinate system is projected using the NAD 1983 State Plain South 3702. That's what we want. So that's good. Other things you can do with your frame is choose if there's a border, choose if there's a background color. Okay, so we're all done checking that. So if you remember, the question is how many immigrant businesses are in each neighborhood? So we're going to use a tool, a join tool. So for every tool there are inputs, a process, and an output, right? So think of tools as a way to make chocolate milk, like I mentioned in class. Your inputs are chocolate syrup, milk, the process is to stir, and the output is chocolate milk. So what we want to do is we want to create a layer that represents neighborhoods, but that has information about how many immigrant businesses are within each neighborhood. So rule of thumb, begin with what you want to end with. Since we know we want to end with neighborhoods, we're going to right-click neighborhoods, select join, and relates, join. So we don't want to join using a table because we don't really have a one-to-one relationship, right? So there's not one dot for each single neighborhood. So that's not what we want to use. And we don't have a unique identifier. So there isn't any neighborhood information in the immigrant businesses layer. So we select join data from another layer based on its spatial location. The only other option that we have, since we only have 2 layers in here, is Pittsburgh businesses, immigrant businesses, and that's okay. That's what we want, right? We want information from the Pittsburgh businesses to go into neighborhoods, and that information is a total sum. We just want to know how many immigrant businesses are in each neighborhood. Now before I go ahead and select yes to this, I want to make sure, or before I go any further with this join, I want to make sure that I have an output location for it. Right now I don't. I forgot to set up my geodatabase. So let's set up a geodatabase. You should have a folder in your GIS folder that's in your external hard drives. And perhaps what you want to do is you want to create a Assignment3 folder, and in there you'll create an Assignment3 geodatabase. Okay. Okay. So now that I have my Assignment3 geodatabase, I'm going to select to make it my default. So let's start over and create that join. Right-click the neighborhoods layer, join, We're going to join immigrant businesses. What we want to know is a total sum. For each polygon, I want a sum of the points that fall inside it. And you always want to make sure it's going to the right place. So it's my Assignment3 geodatabase. And you can always click on this Go to Default Geodatabase, so it takes you right to that geodatabase that you set up as your default. And we're going to name this Neighborhoods Businesses Join. And it is a feature class because it's going into a geodatabase. If it was going into a folder, it would be a shapefile. So we choose feature class. If we don't, it will give us an, oh, it's not supposed to do that. Assignment 3. Oh, if we don't, then it doesn't give us the option to go into that geodatabase. So I have to make sure that before I can actually put it inside my geodatabase, that I have the type saved as feature class. Okay. So Assignment 3, and it's named properly. You always make sure it's going, your outputs are going to the right place, and it has a name that makes sense to you, so you know what that layer is. And click OK. So now what you have is a new neighborhoods layer that has a count of immigrant businesses. And that's your count field. So let's create a map layout. Let's change our view from, right now we're just looking at data in space in its actual real location. We want to look at a layout view now because we want to create a layout for this map. So I kind of like to lay my maps out in landscape format so that I can have a map on the left and information about that map on the right, so my legends or whatever information I want to add there. So let's change our layout. Do you remember how to change your page to become a landscape? That's File, Page and Print Setup, and change it to landscape here. Okay, and for your data frame, you can kind of adjust it how you want depending on how you're going to set your guides. So I want my map to be the dominant feature in this page, so I'm going to set a guideline of, what is that, 2 inches or so, and I want to leave the right 3 inches for my legend. So let's fit that in there, and I want to make sure there's a 1/2 inch on the left and the bottom. Okay, so to center your map, you can just right click the layer and select zoom to that layer, or you can use the magnifier tools if you want to get even closer. And if you accidentally cut a little section off, use your pan tool to move that a little down. Okay, so now my map is right at the center. So let's symbolize this with color. We're going to create a choropleth map of how many immigrant businesses are in each neighborhood, so we can get a kind of an idea of diversity within our business population. So right click your layer. So now we want to go into the layer properties. So this is my data frame that I have these 3 layers in. I'm really just working with 1 layer right now, which is my neighborhoods join. And I want to go into that layer's properties and the symbology tab to create this into a choropleth map. So that's symbolizing information based on a color, and that color will represent either a quantity or a category. In this case, since it's a count, a sum of businesses within each neighborhood, it's quantity. And the value, what we're using as the source for the different changes in color, is count. ArcMap is always going to automatically assign 5 classifications of natural janks. So we're just going to keep that for now and see how that looks. And maybe we'll change the color a little bit. Let's change it to like a red. So your lightest value is going to be like a light pink, and your darkest value is going to be a red. So it's only showing you businesses that have immigrant neighborhoods. So what you could do for context is you can turn on the old layer and just change it to like a hollow fill with a light outline. So now we know we have 2 layers on. We have the original neighborhoods layer, and then we have neighborhoods that actually have diversity in the business population provide us. So if we want to change the automatic, for instance, if we want a red to be our colors, but maybe we don't want this kind of red, this light pink to this red. If you right click the ramp here, go to properties, you can pick where your color begins and where your color ends. So that's the new color ramp. Hit OK. So we can see that the trend here is that in the downtown Pittsburgh and what they call the neighborhood called the Strip District is where you're going to see the heaviest concentrations of immigrant businesses, as well as some pretty heavy concentrations in the Bloomfield neighborhood. So let's make a legend for this map. Insert, legend, and the 2 layers that are turned on right now are the 2 layers that show up as an option. We don't really, this bottom neighborhood layer is just for context, so let's remove that and proceed with just the top layer. Okay, so now what I want to do is you can change the name that you see here in your legend through your legend properties by going to legend properties and then making all the different changes that you want to make to the items, layouts, frame, size, and position of the legend, and including the name. I just find it easier to change it here in your table of contents. Okay, let's insert a title. We'll call this Neighborhoods. So I chose an Oswald size 36, and I chose my title to be Immigrant Businesses per Neighborhood. So that's the title of my map. And I'm going to copy that and paste and double click that and just put the geography subtitle, which is Pittsburgh, PA. And I don't want that to have such a dominant size as the main title, so I'm going to change that to something smaller. Okay, so there is your immigrant businesses per neighborhood, and you can also insert a scale bar. And adjust it to fit your page. You can insert a north arrow as well. Okay, you're all set. There's an example of the first answer, how you answer the first question in that handout. So to generate this as an output, you would go to File, Export Map, and navigate to where you're saving your work. The other question you had in this document, so there were actually a total of 3 questions. So the other question that you had in this document was, what neighborhoods are the businesses in? So let's think about what that's asking us to do. What neighborhoods are the businesses in? And I gave you a hint. It's a polygon to points, right? Because what we want to end up with, if we have we want to end up with point data. So if we have a total of, let's look at the attribute table of our neighborhoods. We have a total of 94 businesses. How many, or excuse me, neighborhoods. We have a total of 112 immigrant businesses. So 94 neighborhoods, 112 immigrant businesses. So what we want to know is, for all of the 112 immigrant businesses, what neighborhoods are they in? So that kind of tells you that what you want to do is you want to add a neighborhood attribute, and that attribute would be the neighborhood name, to the business point feature layer. So we want to add information about the neighborhoods to the immigrant businesses, meaning we're going to end up with this as our output. So since we know we're going to end up with points, we start with points data, our input for this next join. So that's going to be the Pittsburgh neighborhoods and immigrant businesses. We know we want to end up with immigrant businesses, so right-click Businesses, Join and Relates. And we are using a spatial join. We're conducting a spatial join, not a tabular join. And we want information from, make sure you pick the right layer, Pittsburgh businesses. So we want information about the Pittsburgh businesses to be joined to the points. And you have the option of the point data to collect attribute information for each neighborhood that it falls inside or is closest to. We're going to choose that for each neighborhood that it falls inside. And always remember to change your output location and name. Do not keep join output as the name. So the name that we want to use for this is Immigrant Businesses Neighborhood Join. Select OK. Great. So now what you have is a new immigrant business layer, businesses layer. So let's compare the original immigrant businesses layer to the new layer we just created. Right-click the original immigrant businesses and open its attribute table. So this is the original attributes that came with this table, with this immigrant businesses. And the new output that we just created from that join, let's compare that. So now the difference is always all the new features that came from your neighborhood will be at the end of this new attribute table. So now we have this new layer that's called hood, all of these new layers that pretty much begin after type. because business type is the last column in your original business layer, immigrant business layer, and everything from here on came from the join. So for each business now, you know what neighborhood that it's in. And that could be useful information when you're conducting different types of analysis of an area as far as the diversity in the business. If you want to generate some kind of spreadsheet or report. So if you wanted to bring this over into Excel and maybe create some kind of table or something, you would just right-click that layer, select all, then right-click somewhere in here and select Copy Selected, open an Excel document, and paste your data. So your attribute table is now available in Excel format, and you can copy and paste. You can conduct certain types of summaries from here if you'd like. Like if you like using pivot tables, this is a great way to create pivot tables with a very large data set. And if you've never worked with pivot tables before, ask me next class. We can talk about that. Pivot tables are awesome. Okay, so I don't need this document anymore. So next class, please come with this document, this .mxd. Make sure you also have with you the source of the document, because again, if you do not have the container that stores all of the data that consists of what we see displayed in this document. So that's the data from our Assignment3 geodatabase that we created to generate our outputs, and the data that's in the source, our source data geodatabase. So that's where all our data is. Our MXD is nothing without this. So bring that with you to class.